It's been over a decade since Skyrim 5, The Elder Scrolls, first graced our retinas with all its glory. And during that time, Bethesda's entire catalogue of role-playing games have become a melting pot for all sorts of fan-made concoctions. Nexus Mods, where hardcore gamers unite under one common goal: to give everything massive tits and turn every game ever made into Dark Souls. There's this one guy who seems to have a monopoly on giving all the statues massive anime breasts. Just leave the statues alone, mate. It's an inanimate fucking object. Like, where do we go from here, giving all the fucking fruit and veg a slamming ass? You've gotta be joking. Occasionally, however, modders might actually piece together something that's unique and worth your time. Something attempting to be artful, or interesting, or just entertaining. Which brings us to the subject of this review. Arriving on the Nexus and consoles in mid-2017, Beyond Skyrim Bruma is the first and, as of this video, only full release from the Beyond Skyrim team, who are a group of modders dedicated to telling their own stories within the world of Tamriel, using various regions and provinces as a starting point. The team themselves describe this free content as larger in size and scope than Skyrim's main DLC, a statement which I'm not sure is entirely accurate, but it clearly conveys the intentions behind the series. Beyond Skyrim is about reviving that long-lost feeling of exploration, that feeling of playing a new Bethesda RPG for the first time and being immersed in a world that is fresh and rich in content. Beyond Skyrim attempts to lovingly emulate and capture that feeling that has since been missing in the studio's more recent releases. The freedom to go anywhere and do anything, not just as a theoretical possibility, but as a key component of the world's design. Oh hello, it's me, the editing fairy. This is mostly an audio-focused video, but if you are watching, you might notice that at some points the frame rate is not exactly great. Although I did notice some dips while I was playing the game, I can't remember it being this bad. I think while playing it must have dipped down to the 40s or 50s sometimes, but on the video it kind of just looks like a slideshow. So while I would say that at some points in this mod the performance is a little bit poor, I think that the footage might exaggerate that a little bit. I think this is a thing with my recording software. Or maybe the frame rate just was that bad and I can't remember it being that shit at the time. I don't know. Anyway, I apologise if the footage is a bit choppy. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Have fun, enjoy the video. Bruma has no minimum level or quest requirement. On the install page, it states that I can either venture into Bruma with an existing character, or I can create an entirely new one for the express purpose of returning to these familiar lands. So that's what I did. This is Eats His Greens. After months of barely scraping by as a lowly dock worker in Windhelm, Greens could no longer tolerate the abuse from the local Nords and equally insufferable Dunmer, so he decided to go on a little jog down towards the Gerals and start a new life for himself in the heartland of the Empire. Through the land of the Nords he travelled south, down towards those jagged peaks that separate the barbarous louts of Skyrim from their shrewd neighbours in Cyrodiil. There is only one direct passage connecting the two provinces, Pale Pass, which given the current political turbulence is under strict Imperial lockdown. They have orders to not let any single person through the border without a valid reason. Greens is just a poor lizard. There's no way they'd let him through. This soldier in particular, the one you talk to, I've come to refer to as the Bouncer. He doesn't take bribes and he won't indulge in any silver-tongued malarkey. Maybe if Greens was some great hero, a guild leader perhaps, or an Imperial soldier, he would be permitted travel, but his name isn't on the list, so he's told to hit the road. He could fight his way through, but quite honestly Greens would get bodied at this stage.
Open the door! Open the door! Open the door!
Fortunately, there's another way past that doesn't involve just murdering all the guards. Providing you don't announce yourself as a legionary, the shifty merchant outside will give you directions to a smuggling route nearby that can be used to bypass border control. The price of this information is a mere 200 septims, which can easily be acquired by pillaging a nearby cave if your broke ass can't cough up the coins. Narratively, drawing from lore already established in Skyrim, the Bouncer makes sense. Mechanically, it affords the player the luxury of time. You are not pressured to head to Bruma as soon as you install this mod, but the map marker for Pale Pass is always there, tucked neatly away in the bottom of the playable world space. Bethesda typically handle their DLC introductions much less subtly. The quests are delivered to your journal, sometimes by courier, sometimes under mysterious circumstances, sometimes by brute force, but always without the consent of the player. In their defense, this does allow the developers to effectively level gate content, so that weak characters don't find themselves against much tougher enemies. This is what I originally thought Beyond Skyrim was attempting to do in a much more nuanced way. The bouncer could set a soft level barrier by requiring the player to either have experience from another faction or be able to pass through a short dungeon as a test. I soon found this to not be the case, since all the enemies in the smuggling route are level 1 goons, just like greens. Ah yes, the smuggling route. This is the Serpent's Trail, a cave system that Oblivion veterans should be familiar with, even though it sucked. But quite frankly, I can count every good Oblivion dungeon on one hand, 2 at a stretch. Unfortunately, in this mod, the Serpent's Trail has not done enough to fully redeem itself. It is a very different dungeon from the one we see in TES 4. There are a great number of diverging hallways and caverns throughout the Serpent's Trail, but it will take a substantial amount of guesswork to reach the exit. This is not the only example of a non-linear dungeon throughout this mod, but it is the first and the worst. Eventually you will make it to the tail end of the Serpent's Trail, or head, I'm not too sure. And when you do, if you're anything like me, you'll immediately be grabbed by a tugging curiosity, dragging you back towards the gate that you were so unjustly denied passage. You could just as equally be on your merry way to Bruma at this point, or you could turn back around and take the time to visit the fort at Pale Pass. The legate here has a bit of an issue. A Stormcloak prisoner being held captive in the dungeon refuses to give up vital information after an attempt to cross the border. He's a young Nord, stubborn, proud, and a tad naive.
Come to gawk at the poor, helpless Stormcloak? You'll pay, damned Imperial! You'll all pay!
Feeling sympathy for the guy, the legate hopes to talk the info out of the Nord before the Penitus Oculatus, agents of the Emperor, arrive and use less compassionate techniques. It's a tough spot, and it sets up the quest as this morally complex situation that will require a delicate approach. Unfortunately, the legate made the mistake of picking the first lizard from off the road to play the role of his Grand Inquisitor. He doesn't so much as ask for a motivation before giving us permission to go down into the dungeon and try and loosen the prisoner's tongue. Upon entering the fortress, the door behind you is locked. This also means that your options from here on out are pretty much locked in too. The first half of the interrogation passes smoothly. You are also presented with the option of freeing the Stormcloak and initiating a prison break, if that's more your thing. I was a bit thrown off when I realised this quest didn't carry the same complexity I'd initially been teased with, instead just being a simple case of passing through dialogue windows and siding with various flavours of red or blue. This soon became the least of my worries. See, I had intended to side with the Imperials here. I had hoped to get the information they were after and spare this man a worse fate at the mercy of the Penitus Oculatus. Though I also knew that due to Green's low persuasion skills, I might not be able to achieve the outcome that I had desired.
I've decided I'm not talking. No more! Talk to you later.
I was prepared for such an ending if it turned out my interrogation skills weren't up to snuff. Not in a million years would I have thought that failing a skill check would inadvertently force me to kick off a prison riot on behalf of the opposing faction.
Freedom!
I am not kidding. If you want to play as a legionary character during this quest, you must be able to pass a 75 speech or 100 illusion check. If not, then you've reached a dead end. May I remind you, you are locked in here. You cannot simply ignore the quest once this far in. If you are siding with the Imperials, but don't have the skill requirements, then tough luck because now you're a Stormcloak Liberator. I really hope I don't have to explain how nonsensical that is. It's one of those Bethesda's bug kind of scenarios, and I know this isn't Bethesda, but it's the same concept, where I can't tell if this is an oversight or someone genuinely sat down and thought this was a good idea. I do like the overall outline of the quest. I just think it could have been executed much, much, much better. I'm just left scratching my head, honestly. I've got basically nothing to say about this, other than just why. On the bright side, this is the only choice within the entire mod that's handled this poorly, but don't forget this is the very first quest most players will come across, which is why I'm discussing it now instead of the section dedicated to quests. If those players are Stormcloak leaning or have high enough skills, they won't ever encounter this issue, but to anyone else, I can imagine this will only leave a sour taste moving onwards. Thankfully, Bruma's greatest palate cleanser is the county itself, which we are given a good chance to admire along the road towards town. Its landscapes are a fine blend of the old and the familiar, a verdant liquor that flows as smooth as the streams that pour outwards from the Gerald Mountains, down towards the cosmopolitan heart of the Imperial Province. The city of Bruma awaits comfortably under a veil of snow, the steeple of the church raised skyward like an old friend signalling to you from the distance. A larger spire, much further away, melts into the background, the Imperial City. Rolling valleys create distance between the two towers, adding more and more layers to the composition. This is Cyrodiil. You've been here before. You've seen this image before. However, the passage of time, the labour of passionate fans, and the advent of superior technology now allows you to see this image again, only more vivid, more striking than you remember, and with a much higher polygon count. The landscape surrounding the town has seen a huge overhaul compared to the artificially generated geography of the Elder Scrolls 4, but all the parts you remember, the city itself, the architecture, the impression, have all been lovingly preserved and rendered in higher fidelity. Down to the very layout of the city, the placement of each shack and manor. Some of the shops and guild halls even occupy the same lots. 200 years may have passed, and in that time, wars have been fought, and countless kings have been crowned and slain. But for the most part, Bruma remains just the way you remember it. One of the only major changes to the city is the addition of a marketplace, which has been slotted behind the chapel. Admittedly, the layout of Bruma in TES 4 was all over the place, at least when it came down to finding the shops. On those same lines, not much has changed, but at least now it's easier to find 3 of the 7 or so vendors in town. Not to be neglected, the city's satellite settlements both lie beyond the secure walls of the main town. Each are quiet little hamlets with relatively little going on and not much to do. Alongside the lush metaphorical booze brook that trickles down from the mountains, you'll stumble across the Greenwood Meadery, the place where they make the more tangible, less poetic, but just as sweet bottled beverages. Greenwood Mead, a local favourite. Much closer to town, the opposite way up the mountains towards Skyrim, you can find an apple orchard of all things, Applewatch. I wouldn't exactly call this the right climate for farming, but it's been here for over 200 years, so they must be doing something right. You know, I always thought it would make more sense for Bruma's main source of income to be from mining, being in the mountains and all. It seems that all the mines in the county are either abandoned or occupied by entrepreneurs of a much less cooperative persuasion. Come to think of it, I don't even think half the people in this town have jobs. Where does all the money come from to pay for those fancy lodges? Don't tell me the tourism industry is booming. This isn't exactly a prime holiday spot, being so close to an active war zone and all. It's more likely that I'm just not meant to think about the economic status of Bruma, so I won't drive this point any further. Money. If you draw out the playable area of this mod, you're left with a sideways rectangular shape. I can most accurately describe the map as a vertical slope towards the south, with the snowy regions at the top and the more vibrant forests lying at the bottom. I love world maps that make good use of verticality, so this is quite the treat for me. It really gives the area a unique sense of scale, even if it does also feel like you are being boxed in sometimes by the world borders. I don't know the exact numbers on how big this map is, but I'd say roughly between 2 or 3 Skyrim holds worth of explorable area. Points of interest are given a fair amount of room to breathe, which only adds to the overall sense of scale. Of those POIs, you'll come across the usual stuff: forts, ruins, caves. You might uncover the petrified corpse of an Oblivion siege gate here or there, whose textures I can't say I'm too impressed with. This looks like the bottom of my nan's ashtray. You may also find yourself at the much more imposing Shrine of Namira, which has a great design: a stone skull imprisoned in the earth, prying apart the cliffside fissure in a desperate struggle for freedom. At night, its eyes even glow red, because that's what grim shrines to dark gods do. They radiate angry colours. This lush new landscape is accompanied by an equally charming soundtrack, 3 hours of music composed specifically for this mod. While listening to these new scores, you might pick out faint motifs reminiscent of Oblivion's soundtrack. A fine cluster of compositions, even if sometimes I find the string sections to be a little overpowering. The NPCs themselves are, all in all, fine. The dialogue is okay, and the voice acting hits more often than it misses. One of the actresses they got to voice the bandit sounds a little young, if I'm being honest.
I'll carve you in two.
My dungeon sessions were rife with pangs of conscience whenever it sounded like I was beating a preteen to death.
I knew I heard something.
Also, I think they forgot to tell the female orc actress that she was in fact playing an orc, or the actor just didn't want to even attempt to sound orcish for whatever reason.
Acting, like politics, is about honesty. Fake honesty and you'll do just fine.
In other reviews, I've heard people say that the NPCs are interesting and memorable.
When I walk into a bar, everyone has their own story. Everyone has something interesting to say. And more importantly, that leads to lots of questing. Everyone has something interesting to say.
My weapon wants a tempering. Things want to kill him. Fetch me 3 iron ingots to temper my weapon and my book of killin' so I know who needs killin'. Then I'll give you gold.
Everyone has something interesting to say, and more importantly, that leads to lots of questing.
Fetch me 3 iron ingots.
Yes, well, some of them do have backstories, which they are a little too eager to share with the player.
I must urge you to cease and desist at once.
Stranger, have you seen my dad?
I wouldn't exactly call that indicative of an interesting character. Almost everyone I met just melts between the cracks in my memory, forming an ever so quirky puddle of half-formed ooze. Still, the citizens of Bruma are at least more engaging than those found in Oblivion. I don't think the city had a single memorable NPC outside of main quest characters in that game. Only 2 of the miscellaneous NPCs still stand out in my mind as being noteworthy. First is the shady homeless wizard, a peddler of magical items, who will scam you out of 2,000 gold in exchange for useless enchanted novelty toys. I remember this guy because he was my endgame money sink.
No refunds.
The second is the aging, lonely innkeeper, who runs the Snowstone Rest on the road to Pale Pass. There's a short misc objective to gather some herbs so he can honour his dead canine companion. The moment is brief, but nonetheless heartrending.
Just know that I still remember you. Know that I still care. Watch over me from wherever you are, old friend. I still love you.
You also get the opportunity to give the man another dog to look after. You can find Scruffy out on the road. He's bruised, but these are clearly signs of abuse, not from being out in the wilderness. You can either send Scruffy back to his somewhat abusive home, or drop him off to the old man to live out a much better life in the care of the kindly innkeeper. Just be prepared to catch an earful from this twat whenever you take a walk around town from now on.
You gave our dog away! How could you do such a thing? You gave our dog away! How could you do such a thing?
Since this mod takes place in Bruma, a location central to the plot of the previous Elder Scrolls game, one would expect to see a number of familiar sights while exploring, and hear about familiar events while talking to people. There is a conversation to be had here about the inclusion of some of these returning elements, because if such matters aren't handled carefully, it can come off as circle jerking and fan service. Now, what is fan service? Fanservice is defined as a tangential element in a piece of fiction that is intentionally included for the audience's pleasure. The term originates from anime, where this typically presents itself in the form of cartoon women wearing revealing swimsuits. But fanservice also encompasses references to past material for the sole purpose of pandering to an audience. There is a very simple way to determine whether something has been added as an element of fanservice, or whether it seeks to genuinely say something about whatever's being dug back up. Simply ask, does this add anything to either the present or past material that makes retreading old ground worthwhile? Or are we just jerking along to the same old stagnant ideas? I am pleased to say that Beyond Skyrim rarely falls into this category, and understands how to avoid it. The writers make an adequate attempt to recontextualize elements from Oblivion when they appear, in novel enough ways. Things like Frostcrag Spire appear in this mod, Cloud Ruler Temple, various other dungeons and creatures and whatnot, and I think all those things are handled with respect. There's just one small congregation of NPCs that irritates me. They can be found at the centre of town, in a building so large as to be impossible to miss.
Greetings, stranger. Have you come to hear the Gospel of St. Martin?
The Chapel of St. Martin is everything I had hoped this mod wouldn't be. It's unsubtle, unavoidable, and doesn't even make sense. For those who don't know, Martin Septim was an important character during the plot of TES 4, but people mostly seem to like the guy because he's voiced by Sean Bean.
You fat bastard.
The priests here quite literally worship Martin as if he was the ninth divine after the ban of Talos worship, which is not the purpose of a saint. Saints are not worshipped. Instead, they embody a kind of moral lesson for believers of a religion to then follow. A fact this mod gets like 70% of the way to understanding. They at least understand what made Martin a good character in Oblivion and worthy of sainthood. Then the priests start to talk about Martin as though he were Jesus fucking Christ or something. Sorry, Jesus.
This is the power of St. Martin and his holy word.
And I know the Imperial Pantheon isn't a direct translation of Christian traditions, but nowhere else across these games can I think of a time where the worship of saints has been placed at a higher importance than the worship of gods. It honestly comes across as blasphemy, and maybe it's meant to. This doesn't add anything to the world. No one else besides the priests talk about the heroic acts of Sean Bean. If it was handled with the same absurdity a game like Fallout 2 might employ, I would probably have less of an issue with it. But these guys are dead fucking serious, and it just sticks out like a sore todger in this otherwise believable township.
If you're someone who's played through Oblivion, you will definitely appreciate some of the allusions to it littered throughout Bruma.
Gospel of St. Martin.
So, for those of you who don't know, a certain sector of the Elder Scrolls community has a little bit of an obsession with good old Sean here. I think there's probably more fan art for Martin Septim than there is any other character in any Bethesda game. I have to assume that the reason for this is Sean Bean. Which, I mean, yeah, I can get down with that, you know what I mean? Who wouldn't want to continue the Septim dynasty, you know? I'm looking it up now on some random website, and there's like 418 entries of fan fiction that contain the tag Martin Septim. So when you actually think about it, a whole religion dedicated to Sean Bean isn't actually that far-fetched. Anyway, we better move on so I can wash the taste of Sean Bean out my mouth. Ugh. Contrast this with the short but atmospheric pilgrimage to the Cloud Ruler Temple. It's a very brief part of this world, but one that you have to go out of your way to uncover. The Blades are all dead. They were executed by the Thalmor during the Great War, and their headquarters were put to the flame. 35 years later, you can make the trip up to the old ruin, and lay the restless spirits of these old warriors to rest in what feels like a bittersweet funeral. Not just in memory of the Blades, but in remembrance to the Elder Scrolls 4 itself. You remember this place. Now it's abandoned. A symbol of what once was. The quest has very little dialogue, very little actual storytelling, but enough is relayed with just the ruins of Cloud Ruler Temple to bridge that melancholy gap between the Blades you remember and the ones that died almost 2 centuries later. It's a symbol of a lost empire, one that's not coming back anytime soon. Then of course, there's the Hall of the Cock.
Welcome to the Hall of the Champion, the only museum of the Champion of Cyrodiil in the Imperial Province. While some call it a place of learning, I imagine it as an altar to the Champion's greatness. 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 Kvatch was the first city saved by the Champion during the Oblivion Crisis.
Come on then, you yellow bastards!
They bravely entered the land of Daedra and broke the siege of the city.
Which I was expecting to be able to rip apart for committing the same crimes against nostalgia that I find the Martin fan club guilty of. Instead, I received a fun little satire taking a jab at the idea of fan service itself. The Museum of the Champion of Cyrodiil, the protagonist of TES 4, is full of crap. Literal junk. Nothing you as a player actually possessed in Oblivion. It lures you in with the promise of seeing things that you remember, then subverts that expectation by just giving you a room full of garbage. I wouldn't say it's genius or original, but it is simple and effective. Come, see the rag that the cock once used to blow his nose whilst repelling a Daedric horde. For a mere 20 gold, you can even touch the rag.
There you go. Just touch it. Feel your hands caress it.
As a satirical piece, this mocks the attribution of value on sentimental items that would otherwise be unremarkable. Beyond Skyrim predates Fallout 76, and even the Creation Club. But this kind of attitude predates even the digital age. People are willing to fork out huge sums of cash over useless junk. Baseball cards, Funko Pops, funny shaped crisps. Sentimentality is now being used in video games to artificially jack up the price of literal pixels. If Bethesda add a Brotherhood themed paint job to Fallout 76 and slap a 20 quid price tag on it, you bet there's someone out there who'll be willing to hand over that cash. It's predatory, it's calculated, and it's most certainly a crime against nostalgia. In terms of actual value, you might as well be paying 20 gold to touch the cock's snot. I know a lot of what I've just brought up might seem very tangential and kind of off topic, but I think it's important to understand that going down like the memberberry path of just reusing old shit from old games, even if it's just in a mod, I think if you're not saying anything new, then it is kind of robbing the idea of some artistic merit that it could have had. And like I said, Bruma is pretty good at reusing things from Oblivion in either new or unexpected ways, which is what I like to see. It does make a difference from some other mods I've played, which I won't name, where you can very clearly tell it's made by a passionate fan, but they don't quite understand how to recontextualize elements from the lore to fit within their own narrative. Alright, I'm going to leave a trail of fairy dust now as I fade out of the frame. Bye! We move on now to take a look at some of the quests that you might embark on during your visit to County Bruma. There's no tourist information booth, but luckily Beyond Skyrim is one of the few mods to have its own dedicated page on the unofficial Elder Scrolls wiki, including guides and descriptions of event stages for every quest. This is a great tool as a reviewer because it means that instead of playing out every possible version of each quest myself, I can look online and tell you the effects that each choice has. Also, I'm a lazy sod. One of the more fleshed out of these side quests involves taking on an investigation for the members of the Synod. The Synod Conclave occupies the very same building that the Mages Guild once had, before their dismantling following the Oblivion Crisis. Across Cyrodiil, members of the Mages Guild splintered off into two main factions, the Synod and the College of Whispers. The Synod are the Imperial sanctioned regulators of magic. They function along the same lines the Guild once had, providing magical services to the public and offering protection against arcane threats. They uphold the same ban on necromancy, some conjuration magic, and presumably teleportation. On the other hand, you have the College of Whispers. They are ideologically opposed to any restrictions on magic, and believe that everything arcane must be understood and controlled in order to protect the common man from forces who seek to do harm. This is all canon, by the way, it's lore introduced in Skyrim, and it's a great topic to be explored here with its own dedicated side story. The quest begins upon entering the Synod Conclave, where items will randomly just start appearing.
Who made this mess?
The Archgoon hires us to be his detective. Once again, people really need to stop trusting random lizards with these important missions. Eventually, you'll get a lead to go investigate Frostcrag Spire. You can't miss it. They say that the tower has been abandoned for nearly 200 years, and in that entire time, no one has once thought to prod around the giant wizard's tower on top of the mountain. It's not like the Falmor might find that slightly intriguing or anything. Anyway, it turns out that the College of Whispers has decided to set up one of their synoges here, which is just a fancy word for guild hall. The source of the mysteriously appearing objects is an old guy who's currently experimenting with the Spire's teleportation sigils. You know, those things in Oblivion that you could use to fast travel to the guild halls. I actually enjoy this as a plot point here because it highlights just how weird of a concept that truly is, especially in an empire who recently outlawed teleportation magic. I'm willing to bet that zero mind was paid to the in-universe ramifications this technology could have when the DLC was introduced to Oblivion. Here, it becomes the subject of a whole side adventure focusing on mystical intrigue. You will eventually encounter a fork in this investigation. Not an actual fork, mind you, I mean a decision. You can assist the Whispers with their experiments, or you can report their teleporting tomfoolery to the Synod. I chose to indulge in the former because, quite frankly, that's more interesting than just running back to Captain Chinstrap.
I cannot simply step back and allow this to continue.
Though even if you decide to help the Whispers, you'll be heading back there anyway. This time it's you at the mercy of this experimental teleporter as a voluntary guinea pig.
I've been looking for you. Got something I'm supposed to deliver. Your hands only. Let's see here. Looks like that's it. Got to go.
Thanks, Todd. Returning to the Conclave, the Synod researchers will ask no questions regarding where you've been, what you've discovered, or why you've left a shoe on the ground in the middle of their entrance hall. They'll just remark how it must be some odd investigation technique, and how you're such a quirky little fella.
Is there a reason why you're leaving a boot on the floor? I certainly hope this is an unorthodox investigation method, and not simply you messing up my conclave.
Whilst I am indeed a whimsical buffoon of a man, these have to be the least curious group of researchers I've ever heard of. The boot, by the way, is a magical beacon used to ensure the teleporter has 100% accuracy in the future. You get 2 rewards for completing the quest this way, an Ayleid dagger from the Whispers and a pouch of gold from the Synod. You don't even have to tell them about the Whispers, they'll just take your word that the job is done. Okay, you do actually tell them about the Whispers, but they don't really seem to be bothered either way. They just kind of shrug it off like a group of delinquents just threw eggs at their clubhouse or something. There was an opportunity to tell a story about these 2 factions that actually had a bit of weight to it. This doesn't feel like I'm resolving some pervasive issue between 2 ideologically opposed factions. This feels like I'm dealing with a customer service complaint. I think the contention between the 2 groups is fine, interesting even. The quest itself should have played into that conflict of interest with a decision that feels more in line with their academic dispute. Not just a decision about allowing the Whispers to keep playing with their toys or not. These guys are dangerous. They teleported a zombie to the Conclave and let a scamp run loose in the woods, inadvertently killing a group of hunters.
We simply try to keep the people of Tamriel safe from their worst enemy, their own ignorance.
This is madness!
On the other hand, the Synod is characterized as overprotective of magic, to the point of being ignorant of certain elements. That's a good foundation for an impactful decision to be made based on the morals of your character. It just never gets to the point where it feels like any of this conflict even matters. The Synod have a second side quest which you can undertake, one that on the surface appears to be a much less sensitive situation, fit for a common mercenary. Necromancers have set up in a cave near town. Chinstrap asks you to go over there and clear them out. For some reason, every single necromancer in this mod only knows the same 2 spells, that being Reanimate Dead and Frost. As you can imagine, this becomes excessively repetitious, so it's no wonder that by the time I got to the final boss encounter, I was already burnt out and not really paying too much attention to what was going on.
This way, if you please.
The leader of the necromancers reveals herself to be the sister of the Synod member with the unimpressive facial hair. You have to do battle with her at least once, but after the first time you are presented with a choice. There is a ridiculous amount of possible outcomes for this character, who you never even knew existed until you entered this chamber. You can kill her, lead her to take her own life, you can reunite the siblings, you can send her to go work for the Whispers, or you can let her start a new life somewhere else. The player, being a neutral party, has no stake in this decision. This isn't even a choice you knew you would have to make 5 minutes ago. And now this woman's very existence hinges on the mercy of some hired mercenary. You are the judge, jury, and executioner, all in one. Does this woman truly show remorse for her actions? Does she deserve pity? Should she be trusted to re-enter society? This isn't a bad set of choices, it just lacks the proper setup. Say this was instead a quest to investigate the disappearance of Chinstrap's missing sister from the get-go. You track her to a cult of necromancers, but it turns out she actually hasn't been kidnapped, but is instead the cult leader. It is a bit cliché, but in this example it would give this quest the kind of stakes required to make the final decision to kill or spare more impactful. It's much less engaging when you just shoehorn a moral dilemma at the end of a dungeon crawl like this.
Who made this mess?
The majority of the side quests in County Bruma offer the player some degree of choice when it comes to how they engage with the matter at hand. These choices are made very obvious, telegraphed by a composite of quest markers. One of the shortest quests is handed off to the player by a dark elf woman who needs you to go to a cave and retrieve a stolen heirloom. What appears on the surface as a simple fetch quest is actually a ploy to coerce would-be do-gooders into smuggling illegal goods into the city. You are given the choice to A. Deliver the goods, no questions asked. B. Report the operation to the city guard. C. Kill the smuggler and be on your way. Or D. Open the package for yourself, revealing a nest of the old scoom. Because it seems the only thing smugglers care about in this universe is drugs. Never mind Dwemer artifacts or jewels or anything like that, it's always the hard stuff with these folks.
Betray me and our fledgling love will be short but sweet. Not even any love letters. How's that for bittersweet romance, eh?
Why did Skyrim have to retcon the Dunmer into British people? The only choice that has any kind of satisfying conclusion is tattling to the guards. The Dark Elf woman gets sent to jail, and later on you have a chance of being ambushed on the road because snitches get randomly triggered stitches. That's the entire quest. It exists purely so the writers can pull a haha, didn't see that coming, did ya? It's a fine twist on a tired cliché, it's just once again another issue of a quest lacking in setup and meaningful outcomes.
I'm afraid you've disappointed me. I was hoping we could keep the foreplay going a little longer.
Another small quest will involve solving the disappearance of an Imperial soldier. If all the NPCs at Pale Pass are dead, then you have no leads other than he was stationed at the fort. Oh god, I hope I didn't kill him. I figured that scouring over caves and ruins nearby would bear some fruit in this search and rescue expedition, which means I spent more time trudging through an unrelated Nordic crypt than it took to actually find the guy and turn in the quest. Thanks to my dank detour, I did manage to get my hands on a Colovian fur helm, which I proudly wore for the rest of my playthrough, so it wasn't a total wash all things considered. It also means that now I can reference that one stupid meme. The final quest to adopt the Civil War theme is the most fleshed out, and the most intriguing. After spending some time in Bruma, you'll be approached by a Nord asking some intentionally loaded questions. It's very clear that he's trying to size you up and see if you're fit for a job that he has planned. I'll spoil his disguise now because it's very obvious that he's a Stormcloak soldier, making sure that you don't have any strong allegiances to the Empire.
Blood, honor, glory to Skyrim and the Nords.
You'll rendezvous with his posse outside an Ayleid ruin, where you get a chance to see through his disguise and try and work out what's really going on. As far as he'd have the player believe, this is just a job that involves clearing a ruin of some bandits and rescuing a buddy of his. In truth, that buddy is an Imperial scout, carrying important documents, which the Stormcloaks seek to retrieve. Having uncovered his true motivations, you can decide to attack the Stormcloaks or continue with the mission. The crusade against the bandits is brief, and the Imperial reports are scattered around the encampment. I'd actually cleared most of the enemies out of this ruin beforehand while running an errand for Gort. Yes, there's actually a character called Gort. Pre-meme, by the way.
Oh, sweet wampum. 3 iron ingots.
The most incriminating piece of information detailed in this report is that arms companies in the Empire have been secretly providing equipment to the Stormcloak Rebellion. The rest of the report is more incriminating against the Thalmor, written just after Ulfric was captured, but before the dragon attacked Helgen. It states the reason for Thalmor presence at the execution is to ensure that Ulfric is able to escape and the war can continue, as the perpetuation of the civil war in Skyrim is within the Thalmor's interests. These interests, of course, being to further weaken the Empire for a second Great Boogaloo. You can hand over the documents to the Son of Skyrim, which he'll then deliver to the Stormcloaks, or you can use persuasion and convince him that you'll deliver them yourself, which you can still very much do, but you could also instead take them to the Imperials. You can even give them over to the Thalmor, which is a choice I can only see as viable if you're role-playing as a Thalmor spy.
Why are you looking at me like that?
And finally, you can choose to incinerate the documents, the option reserved for radical centrists. Given the evidence of a Thalmor plot, I think this information is most befitting to the Imperials. I'm no Empire cuck, I'm no Stormchurd either, but quite frankly I can't see this knowledge assisting the Stormcloaks in any way, since they already have good reason to hate the Thalmor. I know I keep going on about it, but here the final decision is given stakes due to the high tensions between the Thalmor, Imperials and Stormcloaks. Not to mention the potential for actual role-playing, because this is a role-playing game, which is something I feel people often forget. What I am about to show you next might just be one of the most careless attempts at humour I have ever seen, to the extent where the comedy quickly unveils itself to reveal an unintentional tragedy.
Scholar, streaming anew into
This is Renaud. I mean, just look at this twat. He shrieks and shrills and wears that stupid hat. Why, he's causing such a nuisance, such a public outrage. Somebody needs to do something about this. Yes, certainly, somebody find where this man's carer wandered off to. After an enlightening conversation,
or I could slam you with a tambourine so vigorously that every Bruma citizen could hear. That would make you the joke of the day. Oh, look, there goes the tambourine man.
I was able to put aside my immediate presumptions and confirm that he is well in control of his mental faculties. He can hold a conversation, he lives on his own, he's a functioning adult. Great, so what's the matter? Renaud is a poor excuse for a singer. Despite this, he considers himself one of the finest bards in all of Tamriel. These lowlives in this backwater town just can't appreciate a savant of the high arts. He is clearly narcissistic, there is no doubt about that. The question is then whether this grandiose sense of self stems from some kind of mental episode. I'm no psychologist, but given Renaud's eccentricities, it's hard not to characterize him as a deluded schizophrenic. He seems completely oblivious of others, only feeding into his own delusions and spiraling deeper and deeper into a world of his own. I can confirm the stereotype is true. Some artists are just helplessly, perpetually crawling further up their own arse. The thing about malicious narcissism is that it's often a little tricky to pick up on. It manifests in more covert and manipulative ways, because narcissists are trying to alter your perception of them for their own benefit. Renaud does not come across as maliciously narcissistic. The only person deceived by Renaud's delusions of grandeur is himself, hence the mental illness angle. I am intentionally analysing this one NPC, this throwaway gag, in way more depth than the writer ever intended. But this isn't even a far-fetched conclusion. That's the issue I'm having here. Either whoever wrote the Renaud quest didn't stop to think how this might come across, or I'm just a cynical dick. I'm willing to meet halfway on that one and say it's probably a case of both. I could go along with what the quest is trying to do. I could laugh and point at the funny man, his funny delusions, and his funny hat. But then you reach a fork in the road. You can help Renaud by retrieving his stolen instrument, or send him to meet his death at the hands of bloodthirsty bandits. I could never get this quest event to trigger for some reason, so I'm just going to leave the image of Renaud getting his throat slit up to your imagination. Back in town, people are willing to reward whoever can deal with the wannabe bard, even if that means tossing a coin or two into the communal murder piggy bank. Don't worry about the drug smugglers, the civil war, the various bandits out in the wilderness, the necromancers, ogres or goblins. Clearly the case of the noisy singer is the one that demands public funding to resolve. We can't just talk to the guy or buy him a new loot, no, we have to wait for a hired thug to come deal with the situation. Are the people of Bruma really that callous? I can't see this being an intentional world-building element. Sending a mentally ill man to get his throat slit by bandits is one of the most evil choices I think ever presented to me in an Elder Scrolls game, especially since you as the player gain nothing from doing so. I don't even know if Fallout 3 would have gone this far. The unintentional characterization of Renaud as a schizo, and the fact this is played for laughs, just puts the ordeal on a whole other degree of carelessness to the point where it's comedic in and of itself. The best outcome is to reunite Renaud with his missing loot, and he'll agree to stop singing at night. You can then return to the Argonian beggar who gives you the quest and tell him to keep the money from the murder fund to start a new life with. Renaud gets his loot back, a homeless man is given a new chance at life, and nobody has to fucking die over a little sing-song.
And to that I say, good day!
In comparison, let me show you a quest in this very same mod that does provide an interesting character story, with choices that are charged with emotional and moral depth. Ugly Love begins as an investigation. Dumrag is trying to track down his wife, who's been missing for a few years at this point. The two used to work together, taking on mercenary jobs as orc couples do. Things eventually went south during an assault on some bandits, which resulted in the two being captured, separated, and Dumrag has never seen his wife since. He has come to suspect that one of the nobles in Castle Bruma is to be blamed for the mysterious kidnapping, and hires you to visit the castle and do some prodding around. As a detective case, this quest isn't too impressive. You'd have to be as delusional as Renaud to not single out Simon Gauthier as the culprit.
What? No, of course not. That's preposterous. Bye.
This is the kind of NPC who would otherwise be the red herring, the kind of suspect included to try and fool the unattentive player. His journal reveals that he has a bit of a kink for greenskins, and comments on a fine-looking orcish dame arriving in town with her husband. Even if you have the culprit's memoirs, you can still give Dumrag the wrong information when reporting back to him. This results in first the noble's death, followed by the death of the orc. Skipping ahead a bit, this leads to an investigation into Simon's estate, which terminates in a confrontation between the balding Breton, the orc, and his wife. Turns out the two are actually madly in love, but have been keeping their relationship a secret for years. Dumrag, unsure how to handle this, will confide in the player, asking for your input. You can tell him to just leave, kill Simon, or kill them both.
This crazed brute is going to kill her!
Done.
You can also kill Dumrag before he gets a chance to go berserk, but I ain't about to do my boy like that. What's truly refreshing about this quest in particular is the emotional payoff from your decision. If Dumrag either just leaves or only kills Simond, he will eventually come to terms with the situation and move on. The two of you might reunite in the wilderness, where he'll offer to join the player as a companion. Greens welcomed the opportunity to travel with a partner, since the lizard now only had one arm for some reason. I don't know why. It was just like this for a while. Eventually though, it did grow back. If you instead let Doomrag kill his ex-wife, this chance meeting in the wilderness will result in him pleading for you to end his life, since he can't come to terms with having butchered his own partner.
I won't put up a fight, just end this. Kill me.
This one orc has a richer character arc than all the other NPCs in this mod combined. In fact, I think he's the only NPC to undergo any kind of development. The post-quest encounter provides just a little bit extra spice, but the result is a whole new dimension to the decision whether to spare or kill. It really highlights what's missing in so many of the other quests in this mod. That being reactivity, or any sense of character development. Simply put, things changing. As a player, one of the most satisfying feelings a game can award is that of truly having made a lasting impact on the world, sometimes on a grand scale, sometimes in little ways that accumulate. I think if the quest writers had that in mind more often, then many of the side stories I've covered could have been much more gratifying. I just also wanted to add that the way this mod handles branching quest decisions is very, very similar to how Bethesda handle theirs. Most of the time you go through the quest linearly until you get to a key point where that sort of branches off into 2 or 3 different decisions, right? And this isn't always the best way to do a diverging narrative, but in some cases it can work. Most of the time when Bethesda do this, the choices are between a neutral option and a good moral option, right? So like this kind of encourages role-playing, but in a way that's also very casual and surface level. Like most people in the Vermina quest are gonna kill the priest and take the Staff of Vermina because, you know, it's the cool Daedric reward. Then most people aren't gonna be role-playing a good character who saves the priest and doesn't get the reward, right? I mean, you might get gold or something, but getting gold as a quest reward in a Bethesda game is about on the same level as rewarding a chimpanzee a peanut for pressing a button, you know what I mean? In Bruma, those quest choices, they don't really seem to have any reward differences, at least any big ones. It's mainly just for role-playing. But I think if you're trying to create choices that create interesting role-playing elements, I don't think Skyrim is the game you should be taking cues from for that. Instead, take a game like, I know it's unfair to make this comparison, but take New Vegas, right? New Vegas lets you make a choice, and then you get to see how that choice is actually affecting the world. You know, if you make the good choice, the world's going to be a better place. If you make the dickhead choice, then the world's going to be a shittier place. Sometimes, both this mod and Skyrim let you see the results of your actions, but it's never present enough that it's really like a consistent thing. Just wanted to put this in so you can kind of get an idea of how I think that the mod authors are approaching this kind of content. At least what appears to be the most obvious explanation. But yeah, I'm gonna fuck off back into my little cloud of fairy dust now, in a bit. So far we've been following the various scripted adventures in Bruma, those that are marked in the journal with specific triggers and objectives. But some of Bruma's more memorable locales remain completely untouched by the quest marker. County Bruma has 3 Ayleid-themed ruins which you are free to explore at your own leisure. Ayleid ruins were, by all accounts, some of the worst dungeons in the Elder Scrolls 4. It's a culmination, really, of awful design decisions that led to these locations being so despised. Combat in Oblivion was not fun by any metric, and these dungeons had some of the highest enemy counts. The puzzles featured in these ruins were often very annoying too, and the level's repetitious design made it feel like you were doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over. The Ayleid ruins in Bruma are a huge leap forward when it comes to visuals, even down to small details. Combined with the enhanced lighting mod I have installed, the design really brings out how bone-chilling these deserted elven ruins can be. They feel much less repetitive now, more unique than their 2006 counterparts, and most importantly, I did not see a single guillotine trap throughout any of these maps. And then you uncover the restless undead bodies of the Ayleid elves, and then you realise, Oh, it's just a reskinned bloody Draugr crypt, isn't it? Congratulations, Beyond Skyrim team, for tricking me into actually enjoying a Draugr dungeon. I am being sincere, that takes considerable effort. Well, except for the one that's full of Namira cultists, but even that was more fun than the last Necromancer cave. And at least this one didn't try and assault my moral compass. Riel is notable as the dungeon where you can have a chat with an Ayleid Lich, resurrected by members of the Synod for some reason that I didn't bother to look into. It's cool, albeit brief. Oblivion never really took the opportunity to explain who the Ayleids were, despite a good chunk of that game taking place inside their ancient cities. Here, we get a little dialogue from an Ayleid perspective of the Elysian Uprising. It's really not much, however, and I wish they used the opportunity to explore this idea more thoroughly, but that's a good problem to have, I guess. Frostfire Glade is one of the longer dungeons, and it's been given a similar treatment to try and create a more unique experience compared to its previous Oblivion iteration. I wouldn't say that it turned out for the best, but it's undeniably unique. Around the glacial cave system you can find supply drops left by pilgrims, along with cudgels that will make the patrolling Frost Atronachs flee. It is actually a clever way to tie game mechanics with the idea of inexperienced pilgrims using these enchanted items to avoid fighting powerful Daedric enemies. If you've read through the accompanying book, Nightfall, or seen this dungeon in Oblivion, you know these winding caverns will eventually lead to the frozen tomb of Lord Garridan. If you're also familiar with the rules of dungeon diving, then you know this is where the boss fight will be. I'm gonna be honest and say that this guy was just so beyond my level that it only took a couple deaths before I decided to use console commands to get rid of him. I'm playing Taurus today, not pro gamer. Also, he is twice my level. This is what I was on about when I mentioned some areas of this mod cannot be legitimately conquered without a high level character. Other dungeons stood out less, not to say any of them weren't as enjoyable as combat in Skyrim can be anyway. I vividly recall a cliffside fortress adorned with scamps and wizards. I saw a couple minotaurs once in the woods, a single goblin, and an ogre who must have been friendly. He didn't seem to object to me hanging around in his cave, tickling under his loincloth at least. There are an overwhelming number of caves in Bruma, and I never bothered to clear more than I had to. I'm sorry, but you cannot convince me to explore every single cave I happen to come across. This isn't Minecraft, and I'm not searching for Al-Qaeda. One would assume that the high degree of agency afforded to the player within Bruma's side content would carry over to the primary quest line in a way that was more interconnected and woven into some kind of main narrative. You couldn't be any more wrong in that assumption, because the main plotline contains some of the most linear, tangential, and forgettable parts of the whole experience. Actually, to say there's any kind of plot going on is another invalid assumption. The main questline feels like two separate stories that were cut in half and sewn together, leaving both threads at an unsatisfying, half-baked conclusion. Let's start where things usually make sense to start from, that being the beginning. Adius Villius is the main quest giver and the only real character in this short series of quests who's given any sort of, character. Adius, the captain of the guard, is actually quite likeable as a partner throughout this questline. It turns out there's a reason why you're meant to like this particular guy, and that reason becomes very obvious by the end of all this. For now though, he needs help resolving a lesser issue within the city for which he can't afford to assign men or investigate himself. Priceless artifacts of Akaviri origin have been stolen from the throne room, and the guards are too busy plodding around in the cold, reciting scripted dialogue all day to enforce the law.
Gerals are cold this time of year. And every time of year.
No shit.
The investigation portion of this quest somehow managed to be even more simplistic than the one in Ugly Love. Solving this theft requires the player to have two things: ears capable of receiving audio signals, and a brain that can interpret those signals as coherent sentences. Nothing about this investigation requires any kind of thought on the player's end. Adius gives you the only lead you need. You just go to the seedy bar in the poor end of town and talk the barkeep into giving up the information. The only thing giving this quest the illusion of being an investigation is the lack of a quest marker. I'm not even going to bother explaining who the thief is or why he stole the artifacts, because it literally couldn't be any more inconsequential. The culprit might as well have been fucking gnomes, and it wouldn't have had any effect on what's to come. The climax of this quest involves heading into the Bruma caverns and retrieving the artifacts from a bandit gang squatting beneath the city. The caverns themselves are not a bad level, and manage to squeeze a few different enemy types into the same space, which is always bound to be more interesting than just populating a dungeon with the same variety of nasty monster or generic bandit. 90% of the exploration down here is entirely optional, however. You return the artifacts, get paid, and go about your way. It's not until days later when you'll receive your next mission from Captain Vilius. Seemingly, you've handled yourself well enough that he entrusts you with a more delicate situation. It's the name of the quest, get it? Talos worshippers have set up camp in the far reaches of County Bruma. Worship of Talos has been made a crime in the Empire since the signing of the White Gold Concordat, a treaty between the Imperial Empire and the Thalmor. The Thalmor really do not like Talos for reasons that I won't delve into. Nearly every citizen of the Empire has been forced to relinquish their belief in the Ninth Divine, or risk being sent to the Gulag. I'm not kidding. Blue River Prison is a labour camp dedicated to people who the Thalmor don't like. Nords, they fucking love Talos. Can't get enough of the guy. So due to Bruma's high Nordic population, this has naturally led to a lot of problems. Vilius asks us to visit the Nords in their camp and politely ask them to continue their worship in secret. What follows is the only choice afforded to the player within this entire quest chain. You can convince the Nords to lay low, you can let them continue worshipping Talos openly, or give up their faith altogether. May I remind you, converting someone's entire worldview should not be a trivial endeavour. Think how you would respond if a lizard wearing a stupid pointy hat asked you to give up your strongest held beliefs. In the world of the Elder Scrolls, I should expect to have to run a dungeon of no less than 15 minutes to sway someone to such conclusions. After you've made your choice, Adius arrives to make sure that things are going smoothly. Motherfucker, if you can find the time to come out to this neck of the woods yourself, then why am I here? He couldn't have left Bruma any more than 3 minutes after me. I thought the reason he sent us here in the first place was because he was busy. You know what, never mind. We should probably talk a bit about the Thalmor, since they are one of the antagonists in this mod.
Oh look, an infant. How quaint.
2 agents have been dispatched to Bruma to make sure that the White Gold Treaty is being respected. Mostly they just waddle around in the snow all day, belittling the locals and doing not much of anything. They're essentially PCSOs, but with a racial superiority complex, and characterised with the same uptight dickishness that summarise their faction's entire personality within the base game. Though I have to admit, the lead agent's dialogue is some of the most entertaining in the entire mod.
A Joker, too! Wonderful! Yet another troublemaker for us to keep an eye on. At least if your attempts at sardonicism weren't quite so posturing.
The Thalmor are fun to hate because they are so cartoonishly evil that it spoils any actual pros their faction might have. The topic this mod begins to explore is how a world dominated by elves could be any different than a world dominated by men. It's just a matter of perspective. We get a little bit of this with the Thalmor's dialogue, but it doesn't actually lead to anything. Some unaffiliated Altmer in town will comment on how they've been at the receiving end of harassment from the races of men, but nothing comes of this either. I get it. Writing a story full of racial tension and religious zealotry is a touchy subject, but why even bring it up at all? For flavour? Is racially charged ideological conflict just another flavour of background dialogue now? Compare this to Windhelm, where you can actually see the divide between the Dunmer, Nords, and Argonian populations firsthand. The tension is baked into the very layout between each district. It's not just an element of flavour, it characterises the whole city. Side note, almost every NPC in Bruma will comment if you gird yourself in Blade's armour.
I know that armor. Gods bless you. Gods bless you.
Everyone except the 2 NPCs that would be most opposed to someone proudly flaunting the uniform of an organization they are contractually obligated to hunt down and murder to death.
Why are you looking at me like that?
The third quest follows up on the thievery plotline. Kind of. Before we get to that, Adius wishes to catch up with a few drinks at the tavern so we can finally meet as friends, not just as partners against crime. This is actually a great moment, and Adius is a solid character, which makes hearing him open up about his life an engaging conversation.
For a long time, I've felt like I've kind of just been going through the motions of being guard captain, you know? Like a part of my soul was torn out of me, based in green pill.
Of course though, any dialogue with Adius always concludes with another quest being added to the old journal. He asks you to put a stop to the bandits that have been terrorizing Bruma once and for all. It's also a bit personal for him. Revenge for an old friend. It's presented as more of an offer than an actual job, but given that this is a review, I don't really have a choice but to see this thing to the end. I haven't mentioned Farina's Cutters, the main bandit faction in Bruma, at any point until now. That's because they show up or are mentioned like 2 or 3 times before this quest. They have no identity, no distinguishing ideology or motive, they are just dumb, boring bandits. Even the name Cutter is the most generic title you could come up with for a gang of thugs. Hey, I've got an idea. Since Talos worship is outlawed, why don't we bring that into the equation? Picture this. A gang of religious zealots who believe they are justified in attacking citizens of the Empire, the army, and the Falmor, all in retribution for the betrayal of their patron god Talos. Kind of like the Stormcloaks, but only more radical and without loyalty to Skyrim specifically. You could have some ex-citizens of some of the surrounding towns in there. Maybe this isn't what they want to do, but they see it as the only way to hold on to their way of life. It's the right setting for it, all the pieces are there. It would be part of a cohesive narrative that ties into the main themes presented in Bruma. Instead, the Cutters are yet another generic bandit faction that has absolutely nothing defining them and no relation to anything. Their hideout's a pretty cool dungeon though. I think I actually had fun playing as a stealth archer for once, thanks to the open space which the level provides. Farina herself is another case of a boss set to a level way higher than the surrounding enemies. I had to resort to some very dirty potion spam tactics in order to have any chance of winning. She drops some pretty fat loot. A 2-handed hammer that inflicts a fear effect onto enemies. I never used it, but in theory it's a fun gimmick weapon. Kind of like how, in theory, this faction has anything to do with the previous quests. On my way out of the fort, a bandit started attacking a horse, for some reason. So I took to saving the beast, and now he serves as my loyal stallion. Insert joke about horsecock here. The fourth quest isn't actually a quest, but a ceremony to reward all you've done for the people of Bruma. It's marked as a separate quest though, so I'm still going to say it's the fourth quest. It also helps pad out the quest chain. The great honour we receive for our deeds is one that you've likely heard many times before, but Cyrodiil doesn't have Thanes, so instead you are given the title Friend of Bruma, a fancy sword, and the right to purchase property. Likely the same property that once belonged to a follower of Talos before they were sent to the Gulag. I have to assume at least. If, during the Talos dilemma, you ordered the Nords to cease their worship, this is where the main questline ends. If you instead chose the other 2 options, then the following happens. Adius congratulates you on your new title and escorts you outside. But oh no, it's the Falmor Goon Squad and they aren't too happy with Adius's sympathy towards those despicable Nords in the woods. How dare they hunt, prey and mind their own business. What ensues is something that I always figured was bound to happen. I mean, why else would the game ensure that you spend so much time getting buddy-buddy with Vilius if it wasn't going to attempt some kind of emotional climax? The Falmor take Adius away to the Gulag, where he'll probably never be seen again. They travel there via teleportation magic, which is just so cheap and lazy. Didn't we just have a whole quest about how that was an experimental form of transport? If you try and attack them, they will just instantly skedaddle. Why? I know it makes 0 difference whether Adius goes to the Gulag or not, but it's the end of the questline. Literally nothing I do from this point will have to be accounted for in a future quest. Let me stand up for my boy. I'm not into fucking voyeurism. I'm an active participant in this simulation, and I demand that I have my input outside of the dialogue window for once. Maybe I'm just jealous that the Falmor can use Mark and Recall, and I haven't for the past 2 games. Maybe. Just a little. Either way, there's not much left to do now other than go stroke one out in your fancy new manor house, which is directly across the street from the chapel of Sean Bean. Fuck me. Despite the many complaints I have about Bruma, I still believe that this is a good piece of content. It's enjoyable, it's not boring by any metric, which is quite frankly the worst thing that anything can be. The majority of complaints I have about this mod are directed towards the writing and the quests. If you're the kind of person who enjoys Skyrim, just enjoys questing in Skyrim, going off into dungeons and caves and exploring and getting loot and whatnot, there's no reason why you shouldn't love this mod. But if you have a soul bereft of all joy like me, and you feel the need to nitpick and complain about everything, then there are things in this mod that probably will set you off. I feel that the main issue is one of the promise of each quest not matching the payoff, right? When I got through Pale Pass, when I went to the fort and talked to the legate, I remember being quite excited because the way the quest was presented, it made me feel like this was going to be more in-depth than your average Skyrim quest. And in some ways it kind of is. And then you start playing the quest and you realise that the execution does not live up to the premise. And it's like that for basically every quest. I really do appreciate the mod authors trying to go in a different direction than Skyrim, because it feels like they do understand that people are going to want to roleplay in this role-playing game, and they try and account for that. But I just don't think that they go far enough. I think in many ways this is a good start, and I hope that in future projects they kind of expand on that role-playing and give you choices that matter and have outcomes that make you maybe want to go back and try it on a new character to see what would have happened differently. Another issue I find is one of world building. This mod's main focus seems to be the Civil War. You know, you have the Falmor walking about, you have all the quests between the Imperials and the Stormcloaks, but none of this really culminates into one compelling narrative. They all just feel like disjointed stories that are all drawing from the same theme. I think if anything, they should have just ditched the whole Civil War premise, because none of those parts from this mod end up being the highlights. The highlights for me end up being the Synod and the College of Whispers. I thought that was genuinely interesting, and I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't expanded on more. Another highlight would be some quests like Ugly Love. I wouldn't exactly call Dumrag a three-dimensional character, but he does have kind of an arc that he goes through, and that is a satisfying quest to play through, because there's characters that actually kind of mimic human emotions, right? There's a deep conflict within this mod. There's the part that feels like it wants to be a serious take on the Civil War, and that is in constant contention with some of the quests that feel like it just wants to be a nostalgic riff on Oblivion. And I'm not saying that you couldn't do both, because I think that Cloudruler Temple is already a great example of how you can do both. But for the scope of this mod, I think it would have been best to either stick to one or the other. Still, I think that the map, the physical world space, is great. Probably the best I've seen in any mod in any game so far, to be fair. The dungeons are a clear step up from Skyrim, and I'm looking forward to the release of some of the other projects that the Beyond Skyrim team is working on. I think from trailers, the world spaces look great. I hope that if anything, they continue to improve on the writing and quest design, because you can have a very pretty game world that's fun to explore and has hours of content just playing through dungeons and running around and doing whatnot. But I think what makes that experience truly memorable is if you have great quests and great stories to go along with that. There's a lot of talent in the modding community, and clearly a lot of time and passion goes into creating these pieces of art, basically. Yes, I am one of those people who thinks that video games, even mods, are art. And no, I don't have a social life. It's very easy to take for granted the intense labor and dedication and just talent that goes into creating free content for anyone online to enjoy. But I think it's also important to fairly critique those works so that future iterations can learn from the mistakes of its predecessors. Anyway, I think this review's gone on long enough. If you have Skyrim and you haven't tried out this mod, then I'd say it's definitely worth the 10 minutes it takes to download and install it. If you have played it and you disagree or agree with anything that I've said in this video, then feel free to comment below. I might cover some more mods for Skyrim, some of the more popular ones or some of the more recent ones, because quite honestly it's such a rich resource that I don't think has been quite tapped into to the full extent that it can be yet. And I would love to talk about mods all day long. Good mods, bad mods, fucking weird mods, horny mods, anything, you name it. If that's what I'm here to spend my time on Earth doing, then so be it. May the Nexus demons come and take me. If you enjoyed this video or thought it was interesting or got something out of it, then I'd really appreciate it if you could share the video or subscribe if you haven't already. There will be more videos, probably, maybe. It might take a month, it might take 2, it might take a year. Who knows? Who knows what I have planned? But for the meantime, adios. Okay, one more.